What an absolutely rainy day. Oh my goodness.
What better way to avoid some of that rain outside by coming in, making a ton of fried food, and putting in a sandwich? We're making cheesesteak with some fried cheese sticks and chicken fingers, all with some tzatziki sauce and fries on it. This is a true way to beat some of your quarantine blues by almost giving yourself a heart attack. So let's go ahead and get down to making some of these. The first thing we have to do is create the doughy pillows upon which our sandwiches will sit. First thing we need to do is get 500 grams of bread flour and measure that out on a kitchen scale. Then add 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1.5 tablespoons of sugar. Once you have that all mixed up, put that aside and we'll finish up making the dough for our sandwich buns. From there, now we need to make our milk and yeast mixture. So for that, we're going to have 1/2 cup of warm milk. When I say warm milk, if you put your finger into it, it's not burning you or anything. It's just noticeably warm, maybe about 90 to 100 degrees. And we need 1.5 teaspoons of instant yeast. Now what's in a packet that you get from the store is about 2.25 teaspoons, so it's a little less than that, so just be careful, measure it out. And then we're going to set that aside for a little while, and then we'll make our tangzong paste. You might be saying, Tyler, what is a tangzong paste? And to that, I would have to reply, I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that it makes this really super fluffy. I got this idea off of Josh Weissman's page, and if you haven't looked at his recipes or his account yet, please go and check it out. I have a link in the description. So to this, we're adding 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup of whole milk. We need 2 tablespoons of water and 2 tablespoons of bread flour. And then we're just going to whisk this up a little bit until it turns into like a mashed potato like consistency, and then we'll take it off the heat and we'll add it into our dough momentarily. Now that we have our wet team and our mashed potato paste, tangzong paste ready to go, let's add our yeast and milk mixture into the mixer, and we will turn the mixer on medium speed until that starts to get incorporated. Once you see that it has, we'll add the tangzong paste from before and again mix it on medium speed until it all comes together. Once again, stop your mixer and we're going to add in our 2 tablespoons of olive oil and turn the mixer back on. And as it's incorporating the olive oil, we're going to put in 2 1-tablespoon pads of butter. And the reason we're starting this after the mixture has come together a little bit is that we don't want to encapsulate the gluten. And we talked about this during the sheet pan pizza episode. We want to make sure that the buns are able to rise. Then once everything gets together at that point, it's going to look a little dry, and so we want to add about 3/4 cup of warm water. We don't want the water to be too hot, just warm enough. Then once everything comes together, we'll take this out and knead our dough. Kneading's one of those things that I think gets a bad rap and people get a little worried about it. And so I'm going to give you a couple tips that I hope help out whenever you're going to knead this dough or whatever you're going to do. So first, I always make sure that there's a good bit of flour on the work surface as well as on the top of the ball. And for that, it won't get stuck to our hands nor the surface, and we can easily move it across the surface. So another thing that I think people do a lot is kind of jam the heel of their hand into the surface itself, and it kind of tears apart. So glide the heel of your hand across the work surface instead of going in. Then pull it back like you see me do with my pinkies, and then roll it into a nice taut shape. And then we'll oil up a bowl and plop this in and keep it at a warm area of the kitchen for an hour to an hour and a half until it has doubled in size. Okay, now that we have our buns resting and rising, we need to turn our attention to our chicken tenders. So for that, we need 2 cups of buttermilk. And if you don't have buttermilk, you can do what I did, put a tablespoon of vinegar in with some whole milk and bring that up to the cup level. Add a little bit of MSG because, that makes everything taste a little bit better. 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, about 1 tablespoon of Killer Hogs barbecue rub, and that's by Malcolm Reed over at How to Barbecue Right. Check out his channel as well. And then a couple dashes of hot sauce, and we'll mix that up to combine, and then we'll add all the chicken and get those all coated up nicely. And I seem to have lost the footage of me putting it into a plastic bag. Hopefully you're not missing that too much, but just put that into a Ziploc bag, put the Ziploc bag into a bowl, and let that sit in your fridge for at least an hour, but as long as you can go, up to overnight. The next stop on our fabulously fried food heart-stopping sandwich is the fried cheese sticks. So for this, I'm using pepper jack cheese, and you could use whatever cheese you want, but I just wanted a little bit of kick with it. So I'm getting this pepper jack cheese along with this really ridiculously large cutting board with a huge burn mark into it, and I know that this one is used for pizza a lot, and so that's where the pizza stone goes, and you see the result. So open up your cheese of choice and decide which way to turn it to get the best slices, and slice into about 1/2 inch thick strips. That's what I did, and then I cut those strips in half. It yielded 8 cheese sticks. Then I got the dredge ready. I put 1 egg into a bowl and I whisked the egg together, then poured in about a cup of Italian seasoned breadcrumbs into another bowl. Then I took each cheese stick and popped it into the egg and then into the breadcrumbs, and then finally placing it on a cookie rack to hold, and I'm eventually going to put these into the freezer, for which they'll sit for about 2 hours until they're very firm. We don't want to take them out any sooner than that, because as soon as you put them into the fryer, you guessed it, they would explode, and then you would have a messy fryer instead of tasty cheese sticks. And yes, you see 7 there because I ate the last cheese stick straight up. Judge me. So now we're going to make our tzatziki sauce, because that kind of has to sit for a while so the flavors melt together. So we're going to start off by grating some cucumber, and quickly realize that I don't have a cheesecloth, so I'm just going to use my hands to squeeze out all of the moisture, because if we don't, then our tzatziki sauce is going to be very soupy. And so if you forget or you don't do that, it's not the end of the world, but your tzatziki sauce is going to be a little bit more soupy than if you would squeeze it out, ideally with a cheesecloth. Then chop up your dill and toss that into the bowl, along with 1/2 of a tablespoon of lemon juice. That's a little less than 1/2 of a lemon, and if you like it a little bit more citrusy, then keep going with it. Add in your grated and much less moist grated cucumbers, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and salt and pepper to taste, along with 3/4 cup of sour cream, or if you're healthy, Greek yogurt, but if you're healthy,
why are you watching this Heart Attack in a Bun episode?
Then add 1 to 2 cloves of fresh garlic and mix it up and transfer into a much more appropriately sized bowl, of which I guess I didn't want you to see that. And there you have it. Tzatziki sauce for this, or ready for this Western Pennsylvania accent, gyros, or whatever you want. It's a great dipping sauce. Now our dough's been resting and properly doubled in size. I weighed the dough out, and now I'm going to make 6 equal portions of the dough. We're going to dump that out onto our countertop and divide it into equal sections. Then roll that out into a rectangle shape, as you see here, and then we're going to roll that onto itself to make sort of a dough log. Then once you have that, tuck in the sides and put it on your greased baking sheet until we have them all laid out, and then put into a 375-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 18 to 20 minutes until they are golden brown. While our sandwich buns are baking, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the dredge we'll need for our chicken strips. We need flour, egg, and breadcrumbs for this. We'll pull back out our buttermilk marinating chicken. First, we'll place our buttermilk soaked chicken into the flour, and then we're going to shake that off a little bit to get any extra flour that isn't sticking very well off of it, then into the egg, and then into the breadcrumb, then place onto a greased cookie sheet and let them wait until you get all of your chicken tenders ready to go. Then we'll get our fry on. Now for our deep fry extravaganza, we're bringing up our oil to about 375 and I'm putting in just some frozen french fries. I'm just putting them in a little bit at a time just to make sure that I don't get any spillovers or anything. I'm letting that go until they get to be a golden brown. And the reason I'm starting a little higher at 375, just like we talked about in the wing episode when we put the cold potatoes in, it's going to bring the temperature of the oil down, and we want it to be right about that 350 degree Fahrenheit frying temperature. Once you are satisfied with the golden brown french fries that you have, we're going to take the oil back up to about 375 and put each strip in, and I'm just making sure that each one doesn't get stuck to itself. I don't want one huge chicken strip. I just want them to be individually delicious. Again, we want these to be golden brown just like we did with the french fries. If you are worried about them not being done enough in the middle, if you have a thicker piece of chicken, then test it with a probe thermometer. You want to read for about 160 degree internal temperature, because as it sits, it's going to rise a little bit like we talked about before. Heat has momentum, so temp it every so often and make sure that it comes out golden brown and at a safe temperature of about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Last thing for our fry adventure are the cheese sticks. So I again had the oil at about 375 degrees and I put the cheese sticks in, just looking for a golden brown on those. One note that I would make them a little bit thinner in the future because these were a little too thick and it was a little chewy in the middle. It didn't come apart in a nice stringy fashion. So in the future I would cut these in half again and make them a little bit thinner. Last thing we need to do before we assemble everything is make our cheesesteaks. So I've had this ribeye in the freezer for about 20 minutes until it became a little bit firm. It's much easier to cut that way. So if you use it right out of the fridge, it might be a little difficult to cut. So I put it into the freezer for a little while, firm it up. Ribeye I find is the best cut of meat for this because there's a decent amount of fat content, and that's what we want whenever we throw it onto the stove. Speaking of, I have a little bit of oil that's heating up, and once you see that sizzle with your cheesesteak, you know it's good to go. And hey, what do you know?
I hope that you didn't want to see that made because I didn't get any footage of that.
So just make sure that your cheesesteak gets the nice brown, crisp edges, and since we sliced it really, really thin, it's going to be quick to cook. Then put some provolone cheese or your favorite cheese on top and get ready to plate this all up. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Let's plate this up. So first I'm cutting open our sandwich buns that we made. Boom, done. Then adding in the cheesesteak that we just had on the stove. Then adding a little bit of tzatziki sauce, that creamy tzatziki sauce, you know? And on top of that, the chicken tender. And last but not least, try to figure out which way you want to put the cheese sticks to make the best picture possible. And finally, nothing else from Pittsburgh would be the same, fries on a sandwich. So add those on top and marvel at just how many calories and how much fat there is in this before you get your head in there and take a huge bite and be pretty happy with how this turned out. The cream of the tzatziki sauce really mellows everything out, works well with all the other flavors there, and what else is there to say besides this is a really good fried goodness sandwich? So beat your quarantine blues on a rainy day with making this sandwich, and I look forward to cooking with you next time.